Well, hey, thanks for joining us this weekend. We are doing a sermon series on Jesus' job description. Last week we looked at Luke chapter 4 and how one of Jesus' job description was to proclaim good news to the poor. We talked about what does it mean to define poverty, and it's more than just a money thing. We're looking at the same passage this morning. It's Luke chapter 4 again. And it says this, I'll just give the context in case you missed it last week. Jesus returned to Galilee in the power of the Spirit, and the news about him spread throughout the whole countryside. He was teaching in their synagogues, and everyone praised him. He went to Nazareth, where he had been brought up, and on the Sabbath day, he went into the synagogue, as was his custom. He stood up to read, and the scroll of the prophet Isaiah was handed to him. Unrolling it, he found the place where it is written, "The Spirit of the Lord is on me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." In 1974, Chuck Colson was sent to prison for being a part of the Watergate cover-up. He worked as a lawyer or something for President Nixon. You might know a little bit about the story. So he actually served time in prison for his role in Watergate. 2 years later, in 1976, he formed Prison Fellowship, which is this amazing ministry to prisons and prisoners and their families. And it's a really great organization. The interesting thing is Jesus never did prison ministry. Here he says he's proclaiming freedom for the prisoners, but he didn't do prison ministry. In fact, there was an opportunity when John the Baptist was in jail, if you will, and he seems almost indifferent to John's plight. He was his cousin, actually. He certainly didn't bust him out of jail, and that's another little interesting part. So what prisoners has Jesus come to free? If he hasn't done prison ministry, what is he talking about when he says to proclaim freedom for the prisoners? Now, you might recognize it, but we all are prisoners. We all take a lot of our freedoms for granted. We can come and go as we pretty much like. Even with the quarantine, we still have a lot of freedom. But Jesus talked about 4 different kinds of prisoners. And the first one is prisoners of sin. And I don't know, maybe it was a little bit more clear-cut back then. I think back then and this time I'm just kind of sensing there was more of a us and them, the sinners and the pious. And Jesus says, the prostitutes, the adulterers, the tax collectors, they're not the only sinners. In fact, he says to the Jewish people, God's chosen people who thought they were free, Jesus says they're slaves to sin. And that must have been hard for a Jewish person who thought themselves so holy, so pious, so set apart. In John chapter 8, this is what Jesus had to say. To the Jews, who had believed him, Jesus said, "If you hold to my teachings, you are really my disciples. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." They answered him, "We are Abraham's descendants, and we have never been slaves to anyone. How can you say that we shall be set free?" Jesus replied, "Very truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin. Now a slave has no permanent place in the family, but a son belongs to it forever. So if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed." Jesus replied, "Very truly, I tell you, everyone who sins is a slave to sin." So I was working on the sermon, and I thought, it'd be a good thing to follow up, a good little line to follow up this passage is the part in Romans where Paul says, I do what I don't want to do. I don't do what I really want to do. And so I was just going to put that line in there and kind of tie it all together. And then I looked at it in the context, and it's just too much. It's too rich. So I'm going to read a section from Romans chapter 7, verses 14 to 25 to kind of fill out this idea that we are slaves to sin. This is what Romans chapter 7, verses 14 and on have to say. "The trouble is with me," Paul says. For I am all too human, a slave to sin. I don't really understand myself, for I want to do what is right, but I don't do it. Instead, I do what I hate. But if I know that what I am doing is wrong, this shows that I agree that the law is good. So I am not the one doing wrong. It is sin living in me that does it. And I know that nothing good lives in me, that is, in my sinful nature. I want to do what is right, but I can't. I want to do what is good, but I don't. I don't want to do what is wrong, but I do it anyway. But if I do what I don't want to do, I am not really the one doing it. It is sin living in me that does it. Verse 23, there is another power within me that is at war with my mind. This power makes me a slave to sin that is still within me. Oh, what a miserable person I am. Who will free me from this life that is dominated by sin and death? Thank God. The answer is in Jesus Christ our Lord. So you see how it is. In my mind, I really want to obey God's law, but because of my sinful nature, I am a slave to sin. Here in this John passage, John chapter 8, I think Jesus uses that phrase, slave to sin, twice. And again, in this passage in Romans, I think I counted 3 times that Paul says that he is a slave to sin. And then we do what we don't want to do. We don't think of ourselves as a prisoner, but sometimes we really have a hard time busting out of both actions and attitudes, the things that we don't want to do. We can easily be imprisoned by our actions, addictions, bad habits, laziness, gossip, bad stewardship, purity issues on what we look at and what we think about, and so many other sins. Our actions sometimes prove that we aren't free. We do the things we don't want to do. I mean, even if it's not actions, it's oftentimes attitudes. Hate, jealousy, hypocrisy, envy, greed, apathy, fill in a whole bunch of other ugly emotions. Even if we are behaving ourselves, our attitudes aren't often where they're supposed to be. Both action and attitude can lead to destructive lifestyles. And even if they don't lead to a destructive lifestyle, it can keep us from living a life of abundance and joy. And we are people who should live a life that is marked by abundance and joy. So we easily can, I think all of us to some extent, are a prisoner of our sin. We can also be prisoners of wealth. And some of you say, I'll sign up for that. That sounds like something I wouldn't mind being convicted of. Wealth prevented the rich young ruler from following Jesus. You might know this story. It's found in Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all 3 of the synoptic gospels. Jesus has this conversation with somebody who's just not willing to let go of what he has. Money and materialism is an obstacle. It's an obstacle for many. It keeps them from following Christ to begin with. It hinders fruit in us. Even if we do become followers of Christ, our desire for money and materialism, it can become a prison that hinders fruit in our own lives. And it does bring a measure of imprisonment to us. Here's this great passage in Haggai chapter 1 that kind of helps us understand this idea of being a prisoner to our wealth. Now, this is what the Lord Almighty says. Give careful thought to your ways. You have planted much, but harvested little. You eat, but never have enough. You drink, but never have your fill. You put on clothes, but you're not warm. You earn wages, only to put them in a purse with holes in it. If we're not careful, we become prisoners to our wealth. We become prisoners to our comfort. We're never going to be comfortable enough. We're never going to be satisfied. We're never going to be content. So we can be prisoners of sin and just get caught up in things, even attitudes or actions and even thoughts. We can become prisoners to our comfort and our wealth, and we're just never feeling a sense of contentment or fulfillment. And the third one, this one's a little bit hard and a little bit not easy to talk about, But we can be prisoners of the devil or demonic forces. Language matters. Satan is not omnipresent. There's only one fallen angel who we refer to as the Satan or the adversary, if you will. But there are evil spirits, there are demonic forces that are out there to steal, kill, and destroy. Now, you know that Jesus liberated many possessed with evil spirits. But even today, there are prisoners of spiritual forces. And again, language matters in this. And I think a better way to look at it is not possessed, but somebody who could be demonized, influenced, or even oppressed. I think those are better words. And again, how important it is that we have a balanced approach to this topic, because sometimes we go to one extreme or the other. We totally ignore it, or we make a huge, huge deal, and everything is wrapped up on it. And we at Deep Rivers obviously want to have a balanced approach of word and spirit, and even a balanced approach when it comes to this conversation. There's a movie called The Usual Suspects. I really can't suggest it, but because the language is awful. But there's a character in there who his name's Verbal. He actually is Kaiser Sose. That's a what did I do? I just gave away the whole movie. Anyways, this is what he has to say. The greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. And that's true. If we just ignore the fact that we have an enemy, that's not good. We're gonna make our life so much more difficult, and we're gonna wonder, why am I having such a hard time with this? So again, a balanced approach. Let me say this too. Halloween is coming up in just a couple Saturdays, and we were wondering, what do we want to do with our Saturday night service? Our Saturday night service meets on Halloween. And do we just want to carry on and ignore the fact that our neighborhood might be filled with trick-or-treaters? But at the same time, we really don't want to celebrate Halloween. And people got different opinions, and I can't say for certainty how everybody's supposed to handle Halloween. But I will say this. Halloween is a time where, and this is kind of hard to say, but there are actually safe houses that are set up for people who have suffered satanic ritual abuse. And all of a sudden, that makes it seem pretty serious and not just this comical thing. And so, again, we want to have a balanced approach to everything. That night, we're not going to pass out candy in the parking lot. We are going to have a shorter service, maybe just a little time of worship, 15, 20 minutes of worship. And then we're going to make s'mores out in the parking lot. And we can send some teams out if people want to go for prayer walks in the neighborhood. And we're not going to pass out candy, but if a kid comes by, we'll make them a s'more, and hopefully we'll have a chance just to kind of connect, and maybe we'll have some fire warm up. If it's cold, people can warm up for a little bit. So all that to say, there are spiritual forces at work. I think of a practical application, because this is really a hard thing to wrap your brain around. Is you ever walk through the weeds, you ever walk through a field, and then you get out and you notice your jeans or your pants or even your socks are full of stickers or burrs, and when they dig into your skin, it really hurts. I almost think of spiritual, I guess the word is demonization, or some sort of influence or oppression, is almost like having those stickers, and you need to be real purposeful to pull them off. And a special prayer, we all make kind of announcements. We have to renounce. We make agreements with different things. And again, this is a big topic, and so if you feel like that's something you want to talk more about, please let us know. Come forward, and we'll kind of help you figure out what that might look like for you. And then there's the fourth thing that we're prisoners of. We could be prisoners of tradition and legalism. The religious in Jesus' day were bound by traditions and laws. They could not accept the grace of God as a free gift. In fact, you see the Gospels, the kind of the silly rules. Jesus got in trouble for healing people on the Sabbath. He got in trouble for walking through a field and eating heads of grain on the Sabbath. we become slaves to those traditions. We become slaves to legalism, thinking that we've got to earn God's favor by obeying rules. And that can be very enslaving. I saw this a little while ago, and I thought it was kind of interesting. Did you know that around Manhattan, there is a wire? It's 18 miles. It circles lower Manhattan, I think. 18 miles. It's 15 feet high off the street. It costs $100,000 a year to maintain this wire. And this wire was set up by the Jewish community that lives in Manhattan because, according to Jewish law, you cannot carry things on the Sabbath. Now, you can carry a cup of coffee within your own home, but it's against the rules, against the law, to carry that cup of coffee out of your home, across the street, over to the neighbor's home. You're breaking Sabbath. What they've done is they've strung this wire all the way around Manhattan and declared that all of Manhattan is sort of their domain. It's not a wall, it's just a wire. But in their understanding, they've marked off all of Manhattan, and in a spiritual sense, they justify it, for lack of a better word, as their private domain. That allows them to do work and to carry things even on Sabbath. It just goes to show how slippery it is when it comes to tradition and legalism, and how we're always confined, a prisoner of trying to live by the rules. Today, many try to secure their salvation with religious traditions and service, and they're still not free. There's two passages I want to read just to kind of wrap this up. It's Galatians 3:10 through 11. All who rely on the works of the law are under a curse. As it is written, cursed is everyone who does not continue to do everything written in the book of the law. Clearly, no one who relies on the law is justified before God, because the righteous will live by faith. Again, the rules aren't going to save you. Tradition, legalism isn't going to save you. And then Colossians 2. Do not let anyone judge you by what you eat or drink, or with regard to religious festivals, a new moon celebration, or a Sabbath day. Those are the shadow of the things that were to come. The reality, however, is found in Christ. So here's the question. How are you a prisoner? You're saying, I'm not a prisoner, I'm free, I can do whatever I want, and certainly you can. But is there a sin that you really have a hard time shaking? Is there a habit in your life? Is there a thought? What's keeping you from living a life of abundance? Are you a prisoner of some sort of sin? Are you a prisoner in some extent to materialism? Does that kind of hold you back from feeling a sense of contentment? How about the stickers? Again, it's not an easy conversation to say, but maybe you've been in situations or you've exposed yourself, but even inadvertently, or you didn't know, and there is some sort of spiritual sticker that you walk through the weeds and things have been attached to you. And again, if you have any questions, we could love to talk to you about that. Or even legalism and tradition. Are you a prisoner to legalism? Are you a prisoner to tradition? Now, some tradition's great. It gives us great comfort. But it can also become a dangerous crutch for us at the same time. And the last question is, what can you do to gain your freedom this week? And if you're able to join us, we've been doing these activation questions, and if you're able to join us sometime, even next week, if you're here, we're going to hear people answer those questions. So again, thanks for joining us. I hope we can see you again in person sometime. I hope you found this helpful. Take care. God bless.